The helicopter's blades sliced through the morning air, a low roar echoing over the cracked asphalt of the old factory lot. Employees of Crestwood Manufacturing froze, coffee cups halfway to their lips, as the sleek black machine descended like a predator claiming its territory. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in a tailored navy suit, his face calm but eyes sharp with purpose. At 35, Devonte Carter was no longer the scrawny teenager they'd laughed out of the building 16 years ago. His polished shoes hit the ground, and whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who's that?" someone muttered. An older worker, face weathered by years on the factory floor, squinted and paled. "No way, that's him." Devonte's gaze swept the lot, landing on the faded Crestwood sign, its letters peeling like the dreams he'd once pinned to this place. He adjusted his cufflinks, each glinting with quiet defiance, and strode toward the main office. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. Crestwood was bleeding money, its machines outdated, its morale lower than its stock. Devonte's lips twitched into a half smile. He'd waited for this day, not for revenge, but for justice. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, barely glanced up. "Appointment?" she asked, voice flat. "Tell Mr. Hargrove, the new owner's here," Devonte said, his tone steady but carrying the weight of a long-buried wound. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. "Owner?" She scrambled to dial the extension, her eyes darting to the man who didn't belong in this crumbling empire, yet somehow did. Upstairs, Richard Hargrove, the plant manager who'd called Devonte a useless kid at 19, sat behind a cluttered desk, oblivious to the storm about to break. The intercom buzzed. "Sir, someone's here, says he's the new owner." Hargrove snorted, loosening his tie. "Tell them to get lost, we're not for sale." But Devonte was already in the doorway, his presence filling the room like the hum of the helicopter outside. Hargrove's smirk faded as recognition hit, his face draining of color. "You," he whispered. Devonte didn't flinch. "Me," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Signed and finalized. Crestwood's mine." The room spun for Hargrove, but for Devonte, this was just the beginning of a story 16 years in the making. A story of a kid who refused to stay broken. 16 years earlier, the same lot had been Devonte's battleground. At 19, he'd been a lanky kid with big dreams and a janitor's badge, mopping floors at Crestwood to save for college. He'd stayed late, fixing machines the mechanics ignored, teaching himself their gears and quirks. But to Hargrove and the others, he was invisible, worse, a target. One humid July afternoon, Hargrove had called him into the office, the whole shift watching through the glass. "You're a failure, Carter," Hargrove had barked, tossing Devonte's termination letter like it was trash. "No future here. No future anywhere." Laughter erupted from the floor workers, their jeers slicing deeper than the words. Devonte stood frozen, his hands trembling, the letter crumpling in his fist. He'd walked out, head low, the weight of their words clinging to him like damp heat. That night, in his mother's cramped apartment, he sat on the sagging couch, staring at the eviction notice taped to the fridge. His mother, a nurse working double shifts, had hugged him silently, her exhaustion louder than words. "I'll prove them wrong," he whispered into the dark, the promise burning in his chest like a coal. It wasn't just about him, it was about her, about every underdog who'd been kicked down and told to stay there. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he'd sold his only possession, a beat-up laptop, for $50, and enrolled in a free coding boot camp at the library. The fire was lit. The years that followed were a blur of grit and sacrifice. Devonte worked odd jobs, delivery, dishwashing, anything to keep the lights on, while studying code late into the night. His first app, a tool for small businesses to track inventory, flopped, earning him $12 and a string of one-star reviews. But he kept going, learning from every crash, every bug. By 23, he'd built a logistics app that caught the eye of a local startup. They hired him, then watched in awe as he streamlined their entire supply chain. By 27, he'd launched his own tech firm, Carter Solutions, turning his knack for problem-solving into a million-dollar enterprise. Sleepless nights became strategy sessions. Failures became lessons. He hired other misfits, kids like him, overlooked but hungry, and mentored them, building a team that rivaled industry giants. By 33, Carter Solutions was a name whispered in boardrooms, its software powering factories across the country. But Devonte never forgot Crestwood. He tracked its decline, mismanagement, layoffs, a stock price in freefall. When he heard it was on the brink of bankruptcy, he saw his chance. Not to gloat, but to reclaim what had been stolen, his dignity. He contacted investors, pooled his savings, and made an offer. Crestwood's desperate board couldn't refuse. Now, standing in Hargrove's office, Devonte felt the weight of those years. Hargrove stammered, This can't be legal. Devonte leaned forward, his voice low but firm. It's done. Check the signatures. The folder held contracts, wire transfers, board approvals, every detail airtight. Hargrove's hands shook as he flipped through the pages, his empire crumbling in real time. Devonte could have savored the moment, let the man squirm, but that wasn't him. I'm not here to fire you, he said, surprising even himself. But things are changing. Stay, and you'll answer to me. Leave, and that's your call. Hargrove's jaw tightened, pride warring with defeat. Devonte didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the window, looking out at the factory floor where he'd once swept scraps. The workers below were watching, some whispering, others staring openly. He knew what they saw. The kid they'd mocked, now holding the keys. But he also knew what they didn't see. The nights he'd cried, the doubts he'd buried, the mother who believed in him when no one else did. This wasn't just his victory. It was theirs. Devonte called a meeting that afternoon, the entire staff packed into the break room. The air buzzed with unease. Rumors of the takeover had spread like wildfire. He stood at the front. No podium, no pretense. I'm Devonte Carter, he began, his voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who'd earned his place. 16 years ago, this company called me a failure. Today, I own it. Gasps rippled through the room. Some faces flushed with shame, others with awe. I'm not here to settle scores, he continued. I'm here to build something better. If you're willing to work, you have a place here. If not, the door's open. He laid out his plan. Modernized equipment, fair wages, training programs for those who wanted to grow. He spoke of second chances, of a company that valued its people over profits. An older worker, Maria, who'd once tossed him a rag with a sneer, raised her hand. Why come back? She asked, voice trembling. Devonte met her eyes. Because someone has to show what's possible. And because I believe in this place, even if it didn't believe in me. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Not forced, but real. The first week as owner was chaos. Machines broke down, suppliers balked at new terms, and half the staff tiptoed around Devonte like he was a ghost. But he was hands-on, walking the floor, learning names, fixing jams alongside mechanics. He found invoices buried in a locked drawer, revealing kickbacks Hargrove had pocketed for years. Instead of firing him, Devonte gave Hargrove a choice, come clean or face an audit. Hargrove chose the latter, resigning by week's end. Devonte didn't gloat. He hired Maria, the once skeptical worker, as operations lead, trusting her experience and newfound respect. He also started a mentorship program, pairing young workers with tech experts from Carter Solutions. By month's end, Crestwood's output was up 15% and morale was climbing. Devonte visited his mother's apartment that weekend, the eviction notice long gone, replaced by a photo of them at his first app launch. You did it, she said, her voice soft with pride. He shook his head. We did it. Outside, the factory's lights glowed brighter, a beacon of what grit and kindness could build. Months later, Crestwood was unrecognizable. New machines hummed, workers wore real smiles, and the mentorship program had a waiting list. Devonte stood on the factory floor, watching a young intern debug a system he'd once cleaned. He thought of the 19-year-old kid who'd walked away in shame, the one who'd sworn to return. He hadn't just bought a company, he'd reclaimed a piece of himself. The helicopter was gone, parked in a hangar, but its shadow lingered in every story told about the kid who came back. Devonte turned and